Joining me once again is our senior correspondent, Sonali Kolhatkar. And Sonali has been thinking about an arena in New York City. I'll give you a clue. It's been around since 1879. It's hosted all sorts of events and musicians. I saw the Rolling Stones there in 1972, Elton John, Stevie Wonder, The Who, you name it. Of course, a lot of incredible games have been played there. And also, little known fun fact, the German American Bund held their pro Hitler rallies there in 1930. And you can decide which of these events you find most relevant, which two things resemble one another in this picture after we speak with Sonali. So, first of all, Sonali, welcome back to the program.
It's my pleasure, Richard, to talk about Madison Square Garden's latest rally with you. Gosh, it's there's a lot to say.
Yeah, there's a lot to say. So the star attraction was somebody who can't sing, can't dance, can't play the piano, can't handle a ball. So who's that guy, and what's his claim to fame?
Well, he likes to sway to the soundtrack of a music of a playlist that he has crafted that he likes to play at many of his rallies. And I think there's an interesting that soundtrack keeps getting smaller and smaller because the number of superstar musicians who have prevented him from using their music to justify his bigotry, his racism, his xenophobia, his fascism is getting smaller and smaller. And he alienated yet another a musician, rapper, Bad Bunny, who over the weekend endorsed Kamala Harris because one of Donald Trump's guest speakers at this Madison Square Garden rally over the weekend, Tony Hinchcliffe, did not bother to cover his racism up and just made a very derogatory, very racist statement about Puerto Rico and racist statements about a lot of folks of
Right.
color.
Apparently, I read the articles. The articles I read said apparently he's known somewhere on the internet, I guess, as Kill Tony. Um, don't know the guy. Don't care to know the guy now that I've heard about him. But he said like blatantly racist things about Latinos, which is not only profoundly offensive and hideous and horrible, but Trump invited him. Presumably, this is part of this guy's, you know, habitual repertoire, whatever you want to call it, and and yet Trump has been making inroads into Latino voters, not big, but some. You'd think he'd, if only for self-interested reasons, would stay away from a guy like that. But somebody who wrote about the, I want to get your thoughts on this. Somebody wrote about this event, which included a lot of people saying offensive things, and said they quoted David Plouffe or some Democratic consultant saying you're not supposed to insult people when you're trying to get votes. And someone else said, no, I think the provocation is the point. And I was curious to know what you thought about that.
I think that is the point. Those among Trump's supporters who try to justify their support for Trump to the rest of us will try to claim some sort of deniability or claim that he has some sort of deniability, and they'll try to make justifications about, well, I don't think he really said that, or he probably didn't know that that was going to be said, and it's regrettable. But as you're right, the people that Trump has invited into his fold have been the people who have been so overt in their racism, so overt in their dehumanization of people of color that he cannot claim that he didn't know. And the provocation is the point. When Trumpers are surrounded by other Trumpers, they revel in it openly, only when asked to sort of justify it or explain it or translate it to the rest of us so that the context is what makes them do a double take. But I mean, I think we should just let's just say what this person named Tony Hinchcliffe said. He said these Latinos, they love making babies too. There's no pulling out. They don't do that. They come inside, just like they did to our country. And then he said, I don't know if you know this, but there's literally a floating island of garbage in the middle of the ocean right now. I think it's called Puerto Rico.
That's so sickening.
It's sickening. He went on to make a crack. He went on to, and I'm looking at the quote was in Michelle Goldberg's op-ed in the New York Times. So I want to give her credit. She said then he went on to make a crack about Black people carving watermelons for Halloween instead of pumpkins. And so yeah, it's just so open. I mean, the thing that I'm thinking about that are the about approximately 100,000 Puerto Ricans in the state of Pennsylvania right now who might, if they had been veering towards Trump, might be choosing somebody else right now. But yeah, we can only hope that he has alienated enough people with his overt racism that he'll lose.
and
But
you
it's
know, as you know, Sonali, after there was a lot of pushback about this Kill Tony guy, uh, the campaign did the usual, well, he doesn't speak for us and he doesn't reflect President Trump's views, yada, yada, yada. But I have the transcript of Trump's speech in front of me. And this is what he says about his opponent. She has violated her oath, eradicated our sovereign border, and unleashed an army of migrant gangs who are waging a campaign of violence and terror against our citizens. There has never been anything like it anywhere in the world for any country. Then he goes on to say, these are criminal, and I quote, criminal migrants from prisons and jails, insane asylums and mental institutions from all around the world, from Venezuela to the Congo. A lot of people are coming from Congo prisons. And then he talks about a Venezuelan prison gang, nice group of people that got together in the worst prison in the world, they say, and they've taken over apartment complexes and unleashing a killing spree. I mean, Congo. And, these are all just straight up racist uh, evocations of racist tropes of they're vicious killers, they're murderers, they're prisoners, they're invaders, they're terrorists. He says a storm of terror, and then he says, let me prove it. Here's a movie, and the movie just says what he just said. Armed Venezuelan gang members storming an apartment complex, none of which is, as far as I know, true. And the record high crossings are down for whatever that's worth. But the video calls it a full blown invasion. This is the worst kind of jingoism and xenophobia, as far as I can tell. And Hinchcliffe, or whatever his name is, just said the quiet part out loud for Donald. It seems to me. I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, his from day one, his approach to the White House has been, um, we are being invaded. People of color are the enemy. White people are under attack and under siege. And if you want to have this country for white people, specifically white men, then vote for me. And he has leaned into that very consistently over and over again. His claims about people of color were lies in 2015. They're lies today. And so none of that has changed, right? It is so I think the thing about what Trump is putting out there is so he had Tucker Carlson also, of course, join him at the rally. And Tucker Carlson, who is known for his great replacement theory, which is again basically the distillation of what I was saying Trump is basing his approach on, said effectively, he said America is for Americans only, which is another way of saying America is for white people only. I mean, it's a whites only mentality, right? It's like this is Jim Crow America that they're representing and that they want to bring back. So the new enemies are everybody who's not seen as a white conservative American. Now you can be an honorary white conservative American even as a person of color if you don a MAGA hat and you embrace their ideology. And so you do see people of color in at Trump rallies, as you saw in Madison Square Garden. But you have to be part of their culture, if you will. You have to adopt and embrace their culture.
And
Um, yeah.
And here's something else Tucker Carlson said. He said that if Harris wins, she would be, and I quote, the first Samoan, Malaysian, low IQ, former California prosecutor ever to be elected president. Now, of course, Kamala Harris is not Samoan or Malaysian, but those are both people who
They're
are,
interchangeable. Yeah, they're
yeah,
interchangeable.
they're interchangeable dark people. And of course,
He did that deliberately.
deliberately, and being darker skinned, they are, of course, by Tucker Carlson's logic, low IQ, because this is the usual sort of eugenics.
Yeah.
That's what's behind the great replacement theory is eugenics, that somehow white people are smarter, which I think this rally provides excellent evidence is not true. But this was a totally racist trope uh, that Tucker throws in. And how about this? Trump says, I quote, I will invoke the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, which I guess he remembers from his childhood. But it says here that it doesn't have legal experts say Trump does not have the authority to use the law because it involves deporting non-citizens without due process if they're at a country at war with the United States. So he'd have to declare war against, I guess, all the countries he and his friends say Kamala Harris is from, including Malaysia and Samoa. So that one struck me.
I mean, the thing that I think blows my mind is that he has been pretty open about his racism for many years now. And only now we're seeing, like the New York Times, its report on this rally. It said, I liked this. It was a great headline, a closing carnival of grievances, misogyny, and racism. But even up until a few weeks ago, they weren't able to use the word racist to describe him. And they've done this repeatedly. They've used that word. They've labeled him. And when I say they, I mean the New York Times, the Washington Post, the LA Times, a major media have labeled him racist only occasionally. They've picked up on about a tenth or identified clearly only about a tenth of the time. I'm just pulling that number, but a fraction of the time,
Right.
really identified what he has done and been and represented. The rest of the time, they've tried to fact check him like he was any other politician. They've tried to, as if he was maybe just exaggerating as opposed to the lies being the point. How do you fact check someone for whom the lies are the point, right? Like, what's the point of that? Which I think is a good segue into the fact that you had this, these two major papers, the LA Times and Washington Post,
Right.
refusing to endorse a candidate for the first time. It would be one thing if they'd never endorsed a presidential candidate, or maybe just had done it superficially or not very often. But they broke with their history of endorsing presidential candidates in the face of somebody like Trump, who is running against a historic candidacy of Kamala Harris, regardless of the fact that she is a pretty straightforward neoliberal Democrat. The symbolism of what she represents is groundbreaking and unprecedented for a woman and a woman of color in particular. Of course, Hillary Clinton ran, the last woman to run as a major party candidate and lost. But for Kamala Harris as a black and brown mixed race woman to be running as a standard neoliberal Democrat, which is the kind of Democrat that these papers love, versus
Right.
the racist Hitlerian Trump. And the editorial teams coalesced around Kamala, and the billionaire owners vetoed that. And I know you've written about it, Richard, so I know you have lots to say about it. But to me, those things are linked. The overt rally of hate at Madison Square Garden and these papers' refusal, or their billionaires owners vetoing of the endorsements.
Well, yes, absolutely. Particularly because what we've seen is that in both cases, I mean, you don't have to be a Kamala Harris supporter uh, to to be disturbed by the fact that the editorial boards of both papers made the, I would say, unsurprising decision to endorse Kamala Harris. And in both cases, their editorial independence was overridden and they were vetoed by their billionaire owners, both of whom had personal gain and personal interest in not offending Trump. Trump's been out front about threatening vengeance on anybody who crosses him. Now his aides and advisors are being quoted as saying, they're basically taking notes, taking names. And so these billionaires do it in their own self-interest, totally flying in the face of what's supposed to be a free press. We now know that on the day that the Washington Post editorial board was informed that they did not have the right or the freedom to endorse the presidential candidate they wished, that executives of Blue Origin, Jeff Bezos's space company, and Jeff Bezos being the owner of the Washington Post, were meeting with Donald Trump. So, I mean, this is straight up corruption. And the billionaire owner of the Los Angeles Times has made it clear he'd like a job with the Trump administration. He's very dependent on the FDA treating his biological medical products kindly. So here you have these people not only not giving the endorsement, but doing it for all the wrong reasons. And
Right. I mean, this is a story about media consolidation too. This is precisely that these
absolutely,
billionaire owners, I mean, why does the owner of this retail marketplace own a major newspaper? Like Jeff Bezos has no business being the owner of a media empire in the same way that Elon Musk has no business being the owner and basically now the controller of the platform formerly known as Twitter. These are the billionaires who are working hand in glove with fascism because that is the end product of the kind of country that used to be a democracy. When capitalism becomes or is made to be the supreme force ruling our
right.
society, democracy undermines runaway capitalism. And so if you want runaway capitalism, you have to undermine democracy, which is what they're doing right now. We can't have billionaires and democracy. We have to choose. We can't have them both, unfortunately.
Extremely well said. And before we go, just a couple other, I find myself in these types of controversies defending people who basically I oppose everything they stand for, but I will defend them on this one. Case in point, Hillary Clinton, who to me represents the worst of the neoliberal Democratic Party sellout trend. Well, not the worst, that's Bill Clinton, but some another piece of work named Sid Rosenberg, New York City radio host, who I also never heard of, said, and I quote about Hillary. I can't use his full language, but quote, "She is some sick bastard, that Hillary Clinton. What a sick son of a b blank word." So now he's misgendering her as
Mhm.
a form of insult. I mean, that's disgusting. These Rudy Giuliani racists. I can't. I got to watch my
You can't
language.
even practice law in the state of New York anymore.
Right, right, right. It should say former New York. This says former New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani. It should say and disbarred attorney Rudy Giuliani. Set of Palestinians. They are taught to quote kill us at 2 years old and are quote on the side of the terrorists. Remarks that will encourage the slaughter of children, further slaughter of children. Um,
Yeah.
and then we have our billionaire owners of our mass media afraid to even chastise this. So what do
And
we do? Yeah,
there's also a couple of points that I just want to, since next week is the election, and what you were saying about Giuliani's remarks on Palestinians, I want to bring up the fact that there has been a group of community leaders in Muslim and Arab community leaders in Michigan who have basically endorsed Kamala Harris only because they know Trump would be worse. And we've seen in the past week, reports of Trump in regular conversations with Benjamin Netanyahu, who Netanyahu has very, very cynically exploited the election cycle in the United States to advantage Trump, and all intents and purposes show that he has essentially pushed Biden's efforts aside at a ceasefire. That said, of course, Biden has not tried hard enough for a ceasefire, and I do not want to let Biden off the hook at all. But the fact that Netanyahu sees an ally in Trump and doesn't see one in Biden, who has signed off, you know, wholeheartedly on the genocide, maybe quietly, privately chastising Netanyahu. But that fact alone should really, really scare us.
Well, I don't
So,
want to defend Biden because I think he's a war criminal, but just to be frank about it, but the fact is, Trump has always had Netanyahu's favor. Netanyahu's always preferred him because I guess for whatever reason, he'd get less guff or whatever. And for his part, Trump keeps saying, quote unquote, finish the job,
yeah.
which is straight up Nazi talk, as far as I'm concerned. It's calling for mass extermination. And this is by no means to excuse Joe Biden, but and I would certainly wish Kamala Harris would stand up. But you're right. I mean, even the people who have, that's a deeply personal decision, especially for Arab Americans and Muslims. But some of the organizers of the uncommitted movement have said if you live in a swing state, uh, you should vote against Trump, is the way they put it. And I understand why they say that. So I don't live in a swing state, so I can vote for anybody I want or plan to. But if I lived in a swing state, yeah, I would have to take that into consideration. But I'll give you the last word.
I mean, all I can say is that we have a choice between a person who is from an administration that has enabled a genocide versus somebody who has promised a much wider authoritarian push against all of us and not just Palestinians, right? And so we have to choose between somebody who represents anti-Palestinian violence versus somebody who has promised violence against all people of color. And what a awful choice that is. Yeah, I mean, good
Right.
luck to all,
Which
right?
is which is a good reminder that you are not your vote. Your vote is something you do for tactical reasons. And if you find it tactically wise or expedient to vote for somebody who you have profound objections to, that is not, we've got to stop thinking of our votes as,
They're
our
not love letters.
they're not
They're
love
test
letters.
wounds.
They're not
They're
seals
test
of
wounds.
approval. They're just, if tactically that makes sense to you, do it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Let's see what happens next week, Richard.
And the week after, and the week after, and the week after, as people keep recounting and suing each other. Yes, right. We depend on your support here at the Zero Hour, so please give whatever you can at any of the links you see on your screen. Thanks so much.